All right, friends, you're in for a treat today. We have somebody with us who you will definitely recognize. He is a New York Times best-selling author. His life has been the feature of a Hollywood movie, the book Case for Christ, and also known for being an evangelist, writing a ton of other books, the Case series. Lee Strobel, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, Sean, I'm glad to do it. I love you, love what you do. You make such a
Mhm.
huge contribution in so many areas, so I'm honored.
Well, this interview is going to be a little different. We're not going to be pressing you on the case for the resurrection, which we did last time. We had a
Yeah.
conversation last Easter. This is to give viewers and really myself just a behind the scenes look at your life, the
Hmm.
people, the books that shaped who you are. Number one, because it's interesting, but also maybe to just get some interesting stories and wisdom and insights that we'd
Oh,
love to learn from you.
good.
So,
Good luck with that.
yeah, well, let's give it a shot.
Okay.
So my first question is: you were friends with Luis Palau, who passed away recently. I
Yep.
would love to hear how he influenced you and what you learned from him.
Boy, Luis is a little bit like your dad in the
Hmm.
sense that he was a friend and a hero
Hmm.
of mine. I just loved him. Um, and his whole family, Andrew and Kevin, they're just a tremendous family. But what I did is I was at the time working on a new book called The Case for Heaven. And he knew he was dying. He had stage 4 lung cancer. And so I
Wow.
flew out to his home in Oregon, and I spent a day with him
Hmm.
recently to talk to him about his attitude toward heaven and how that changes when you're on the precipice of dying. He didn't know how long he would have to live, and as it turned out, right after the turn of the year, he took a turn for the worse, and as you know, just died recently. The funeral is this Saturday. But Luis, Luis was amazing. Luis was the kind of person, kind of like your dad, in the sense that everybody who met him walks away saying he's my friend. He was just a very gregarious guy, very passionate,
Hmm.
very committed to telling people about Jesus. I remember one of the first times I had dinner with him, we were out in Chicago, and Mark Middleberg was on one side of him, and I was on the other side. And sometime between the trout and the apple crisp for dessert, all of a sudden, he grabbed both of our forearms real urgently and said, "Would you pray for my son Andrew?" He
Wow.
said, he said he's not walking with the Lord. He's going
Hmm.
down dangerous paths. He's walked away from things. Would you pray for my son? Well, of course, if Luis asks you to pray, you pray right then and there. So
Right.
we dropped our forks and we prayed for Andrew, and sure enough, Andrew did end up not only coming to faith, but is now the main speaker at Luis Palau Ministries. And in fact, I tell his story in my book, Case for Grace. But I had a long conversation with him, and one of the things I asked him was because he joked with me. He said, "Lee, you're such a journalist." He said, "I would love it if when I get to heaven, I could text you and tell you about it because because I know you'd want to know, you know."
That's right.
And I said, if you can, go ahead and do it because that would be a great story. But I asked him. I said, what do you think you would want to say to your fellow believers
Hmm.
once you're in heaven? If you could send a message back, a
Wow.
text or something, what would you say? And he thought for a moment and he said, and I wrote it down because he said, I would say, go for it.
Hmm.
Go for it. He said, take a risk. Tell others about the good news of Christ. I can't do his great accent, but
Sure. Sure.
he said, remember that it's the job of the Holy Spirit to convict them of their sin. He's your partner. Let him do
Hmm.
his work in them. You bring them the best news on the planet, that there's redemption, that there's a relationship with God, that there's heaven, that there's an eternal party that's waiting for them.
Wow.
And he told me the story about when he was young. His dad died when he was 10. His dad was a great
Okay.
believer and shared his faith, would go out and do evangelistic things. And so he died when Luis was 10. And his mother would encourage Luis. She would say on a Sunday morning, Luis, there are villages around here, and this is in South Argentina,
Okay.
that don't have a church. go out and tell them about Jesus.
Wow.
And Luis, I said, how did he respond? And he said, well, I was slow to respond. I say to her, Mom, I'm waiting for the call. And I said, I bet she didn't respond well to that. And he said, no, she didn't. She was getting upset. She said, the call, the call, the call went out 2,000 years ago, Luis. The Lord is the Lord is waiting for your answer. You're not waiting for his call. And he said, sure enough, she was right. The default mechanism, the default position for a believer is to go and share your faith. You don't need to wait for a special call. But as we finished that conversation, one of the last things he said to me before we parted, and I think this was really powerful. He said, Lee, I can tell you from personal experience that at the end of your life, when all is said and done, you'll never regret being courageous for Christ.
Wow.
And I thought,
Wow.
that's good to remember. You'll never regret being courageous for Christ.
Wow.
So that's what I take away from Luis. Luis, a man of prayer, a man of commitment, an evangelist to the hilt. Love God, love people.
Wow, what a beautiful legacy. Now, I was going to ask you a little later about this, but I think now is a natural time, especially because a question came in. If you went and interviewed him about heaven, I'm guessing, and others are, this may have something to do with your next book. So here's a great question from Persuasive Evangelism. What's your next book that will be published? Tell us about The Case for Heaven.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's my next major book. It's called The Case for Heaven, A Journalist Investigates Evidence for Life After Death. And it'll come out September 14th from Zondervan. You can pre-order it already on Amazon and other online retailers. But I spent about 2 years. It goes back to something that happened to me 10 years ago.
Okay.
And this was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I started to get disoriented. I started to get paranoid. I thought that people were watching me. I thought the police were going to come arrest me. Then Leslie was out shopping and I'm sitting on the couch. I started to hallucinate.
Wow.
I saw demons slithering on the floor toward me. And Leslie came home and she said, you need to go to bed. You're not well. I went to bed. She finds me later on the floor of our bedroom, unconscious. She calls a paramedic. The ambulance takes me to the hospital. And I opened my eyes in the emergency room, and a doctor's looking down at me. And he said, you're 1 step away from a coma, 2 steps away from dying.
Holy cow. And
then I went unconscious again. And that was the closest I've been to dying. And I was on the edge of death for several days there. So it turned out I had a very kind of a rare condition called hyponatremia, which is a sudden fall in your blood sodium level. Okay. And what that causes is your brain cells begin to take in water, moisture, and so your brain is expanding in your skull. And so you get disoriented, you have hallucinations, then you go into a coma, and then you die.
Wow.
The problem with it is they diagnose it pretty quickly, but the problem is you have to raise that blood sodium level very carefully over a period of days, because if you do it too quickly, you'll end up paralyzed or mentally disabled.
Wow.
So that was the closest I've come to death. And it really got me thinking, even as a believer, we all believe in an afterlife. We believe in what the Bible teaches about heaven and hell, but sometimes we don't give it much thought. How do we know it's true? Is there any external evidence that it's true? Can we really trust? It's kind of outrageous to think that we're going to live after we die. So that kind of got me thinking about this topic. And so I spent the last 2 years working on this book, interviewing neuroscientists, philosophers, theologians, etc., on how do we know that there is an afterlife, number one. What about heaven? What's that like? Number two, what about hell? Is it logical to believe in hell? Does it make sense? What about these new trends of annihilationism and universalism? I talked to an expert on reincarnation. Could that be an explanation for what happens?
Wow.
So, and then the Luis Palau chapter is part of that book. And
Okay.
so when that comes out, the whole chapter will be written or published. But I'm excited about the book because COVID has got a lot of people. Leslie and I were in a restaurant a week ago, and the waitress was a young woman. I would guess maybe 18, 19 years old, probably working a part-time job. We got talking to her, and all of a sudden she got tears in her eyes, and she said, "I'm sorry, we just lost a loved one to COVID."
Wow.
And I'm thinking, here's a young woman. It's probably the first person in her family who's died, and you better believe she's thinking about death. The fragility of life becomes ever more relevant to us, and so I'm hoping that it's an encouragement to people, and that it lets people know that there is hope, that there is an afterlife, and that we can be assured that we'll spend it with Christ.
Lee, it sounds like such a timely book because I had a student email me this week and he said, "Hey, give me book suggestions for a friend." And this is a Biola student who's probably 20, 21 years old. He said he's been worried and thinking about mortality more and more. And I've heard that a few
Yeah,
times over the past few months. So
yeah,
I
yeah. My
think,
brother died of COVID
that's right.
right at the beginning of the pandemic. He was 76 years old and not in good
Ah,
health, and we couldn't even gather for a memorial service at the time. So I think that's true for a lot of people. So I think usually death is not something people think about before they get to be about my age, because I'm going to be
sure.
70. But nowadays, as your Biola student illustrates, a lot more people are beginning to think about it because of COVID.
Well, you talked about Luis Palau, the influence he had in your life, but tell me some of the other people that come to your mind that shaped you as a writer, as a husband. Just who are the people in your life that most influenced you and why?
Wow. I think the single most influential person in my life is Mark Middleberg.
Wow.
Uh, Mark has been my
Wow.
ministry associate, partner, buddy, pal
Hmm.
for over, golly, since 1987.
That's
So,
awesome.
I just talked to him a few minutes ago. We
Hmm.
talk every day. He lives in Colorado now. I live part time in Colorado and part time in Houston. And, God put Mark in my life at a time when I had just left journalism. My whole life was about journalism. I went to law school to be legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. I had printer's ink in my blood, and I felt so called to the church, to being full time on the staff of the church, that I remember I took a 60% pay cut to join the church, and
Wow.
I remember the pastor called me a couple months later and said, "By the way, when we offered you like a 60% pay cut, we were kind of surprised you said yes right away." And I said, in all honesty, I said, "You know what? I would have done it for free."
Wow.
And I mean, I would have done it for free. I would have
Wow.
found a way to support me. I would have done it for free. I felt
Wow.
so called to the church as the hope of the world. And so that's how I met Mark. We were hired at the same time, and he was my boss.
Hmm.
I was one of my jobs was to be associate director of evangelism, and Mark was the first time the new evangelism director of the church. So we became best buddies, and he's got a master's degree from Trinity Seminary in philosophy of religion. He mentored me for 2 years in theology and philosophy as I was coming out of the journalism world and into this new reality of the church world. And he reads everything I write and edits it before it goes to the publisher, and same with me and him.
That's great.
I just think it's so important for people in ministry to have a friend like that, a best buddy who gets you through the tough times, who
Huh.
knows everything about you, who you are not afraid to confess every sin to,
Wow.
who you who will talk you off a ledge if you're on a ledge,
Hmm.
who will encourage you when you're depressed, who will cheer with you and celebrate with you when God shows up and something extraordinary happens. And I honestly, I don't know how people get ministry is hard, and it's
It
hard
is.
during this pandemic. Pastors are working overtime. This has been maybe the most stressful time
Yeah.
for pastors of local churches. and they need someone in their life. I got an email the other day from Rick Warren,
Hmm.
and the subject line said, "I love you, Lee."
Oh,
I used to be a teaching pastor with
yeah,
him
I
at
remember that.
Saddleback Church. So it said, "I love you, Lee," and I opened it up, and it said, in light of what's happened with the fall recently of some well-known church
Hmm.
leaders and apologists, he said, "I just want to reiterate, I'm there for you. I will
Wow.
talk you off the ledge if you're ever on the
Wow.
ledge, and I know you'll do the same for me." We need each other.
Hmm.
And any pastor that's listening, any person in church ministry that's listening, if you don't have that kind of relationship, you need to make that priority one for the year 2021.
That's such good advice and good wisdom. I wondered if you were going to mention Mark, but I know another person who's had a huge influence on your life is your wife, Leslie. Will you
Yeah,
tell us just
yeah.
briefly how you met her, and what is your, and I briefly, like, I know you could give us
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole story, but I'm really interested in the question of what your relationship and partnership looks like.
yeah. We met when we were 14 years old. It was one of those situations where, humanly speaking, there was about 30 seconds that our lives intersected. There
Huh.
was no reason that we ever would have met except for that 30-second strange encounter.
Wow.
So what happened was I was 14 years old. My buddy and I were downtown Chicago, just walking around downtown Chicago, and we're near the train station, and I see a neighbor of mine, another kid by the name of Clay, and he had a girl with him, and I said, "Clay," and "Oh, Lee, oh." So we connected, and "How you doing? Good." And he said, "This is my girlfriend Leslie." And I'm thinking, not for long, that's not my girlfriend Leslie. So she went home that day and she told her mom, "I met the boy I'm going to marry."
Oh my
And
goodness. At
yeah,
14, met you once.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And sure enough, I would save up my dimes because I had two older brothers and I couldn't let them hear me on the phone talking to a girl. They would have harassed me.
Of
So
course.
I would go to a payphone at a gas station,
Wow.
and I would put the dimes in the phone and call up Leslie. And so we first met at 14, and we broke up once for 9 months during high school. But other than that, we've been together the whole time.
Wow.
Best buddies. I think
Hmm.
that's been the secret to our relationship is we're the
Hmm.
best of friends. And romance came later. We just love being with each other. Um, and so we dated on and off in high school, mostly on. Um, when I moved down to the University of Missouri to go to journalism school, she moved down and worked at a bank and helped put me through school. We got married
Wow.
right after our sophomore year. It was one of those things where back then, when I was in school, phone calls were real expensive.
Yeah.
And so you only called your parents like every other week. You give them a call on a Sunday or something. So I called my mom one Sunday in my sophomore year in college, and I didn't have anything to say. And and just to make conversation, I said, "Oh, Leslie and I are going to get married." And what I meant was someday,
Oh,
after we
wow.
graduate. Well, my mom said, "Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I'll make all the arrangements." She hangs up. And I turn to Leslie, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and I pick it up. It's Leslie's mom. "I
Oh,
hear you're getting
gosh.
married."
Oh, no.
I guess we're getting married. So we got married.
Wow.
We were so young when we got married, we couldn't have champagne at our wedding. We had champagne glasses with milk in them. And I was 20, she was 19. And
That's funny.
so we just have a very easy marriage.
Hmm.
We love each other. Our personalities mesh
Hmm.
very well. We have a similar. Of course, she prayed me into the kingdom, and we have the same heartbeat for Christ and for the church, and to see people come to faith. And it's just been the greatest joy of my life
Hmm.
to have a life partner like that. And now, I travel with her wherever I go,
Hmm.
virtually all the time. She comes with me,
That's
and not just for
awesome.
accountability, but because we enjoy it.
Sure.
It's fun. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, I love hearing you talk about her the way I talk about my wife, and my dad talks about my mom as well. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've got a bunch more questions for you, and there's some
Sure.
that are rolling in here as well. What
Yeah.
what books? Obviously, as a journalist, as an apologist, as a pastor, you read a ton, and I don't mean biblical books. What books come to your mind that just were most influential, or in your life or thinking?
Oh golly, yeah, I read everything, so it's more of a conglomeration of everything I read.
Okay.
One of the books that really ministered to me, this is well before I was a Christian, but To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh wow.
Uh, it's one of my favorite books. I read that in high school,
Huh.
and the I had a strong sense of social justice back then, as I do today. And that's a book about justice and discrimination and prejudice and so
Yeah.
forth. And it was a very important book to me. Um, Golly, what else? On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I used to be a motorcycle fanatic,
Yeah.
and one of my goals was to just ride a motorcycle all around America. And
Okay.
I never got to do it, but I did have a bunch of motorcycles. Um,
Okay.
Golly, in the
That's
Christian realm, all, I just, especially when I'm working on a book, for every person I interview for a book, I have to read about 10 books,
sure.
so all their stuff and stuff that
Yeah.
attacks their stuff and everything. So I'm just constantly bouncing around from book to
Hmm.
book. So I remember before as a Christian, I read, everything from Camus, Christian metaphysics to
Wow.
David Hume on miracles. I read some early stuff by C.S. Lewis
Okay.
and C.S. Lewis, of course, I think goes without saying that he was influential to just about every Christian apologist. So, of course, I want
That's
to mention Mere Christianity. Even your dad's book influenced me
huh.
before I became a Christian. Um, yeah.
That's awesome. I don't know what I expected you to say, but I did not expect To Kill a Mockingbird. That is really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know
But
what kind of came to
yeah,
mind, but it was
that's
such a
great.
powerful book. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
What about biblical books? Do you have a favorite book or story in the Bible that you just go back to that resonates or speaks to you?
Well, it may be kind of unusual, but I love Luke.
Okay.
Um, and the reason I love Luke is he's sort of a first century investigative reporter.
He
You know,
is.
he went around and interviewed everybody. I love that about Luke.
Yep. Yep.
He checked things out. I carefully investigated everything. Talk about the certainty of what took place. I mean, he was checking stuff out. And so I relate to that. Plus, he wrote, quarter of the New Testament between Luke and Book of Acts. So very influential. One of the stories I like the most that I go back to a lot is the story of John the Baptist when he was
Hmm.
arrested. And when he
Oh,
started to wonder, is Jesus the one? Or are we to wait for somebody else? Um, People debate whether he was really doubting there.
sure.
Um, I think he had questions. I think he had doubts, and but he checked things out. He did what I did when I was an atheist. He sent some people to check things out. And they said to Jesus, are you the one we've been waiting for? Are we to wait for somebody else? Now, I love Jesus' response. Go back to John and tell him what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. In other words, go back and tell him about the evidence you've seen with your own eyes that convinces you that I am the one I claim to be. And
Hmm.
of course, it's later that that Jesus gets up and says, "Among those born of women, there's no one greater than John."
Right.
So this didn't disqualify John from any role in the kingdom of God because he dared to ask a question.
Sure.
So I find that encouraging. I use that story to talk to spiritual seekers a
Hmm.
lot and say it's okay to ask questions. Jesus didn't freak out. He said, "Here's the evidence. Go back and tell him what you've seen and heard." He
Hmm.
didn't. He didn't get angry at John for expressing this question.
When I asked J.P. Moreland about his favorite book, he said, "Can I have two? Because I want Luke Acts."
Oh,
And
did he say that?
yeah,
Oh,
he
that's
did.
interesting.
And he didn't
Oh,
mention the
wow.
investigative journalist angle, but it's a rational, logical,
It
thoughtful,
is.
evidential book, which would make perfect sense for
Right.
JP too. Well, here's one for you. How do you deal with personal criticism? What I mean is,
Yeah.
I got criticism a while ago. It was the very first time somebody really came after me, and I called my wife on the phone, and I heard her voice, and I'm about to teach a class, and I just started bawling.
Yeah.
Like I had never had such personal, like it hurt.
Yeah.
This is probably a
Yeah.
decade ago. Now it's like daily, to be honest. But I sent out a tweet and I said, how do you get to the point where criticism just, rolls off you like water in the back of a duck? And our friend Lenny Esposito, he said, I'm not sure you'd want to ever get there where you at least, and I thought, wow, that's such good wisdom. So how do you deal with that?
I try to sift it first. Is there something there that's, did I mess up somehow? Was I not clear about something? Did I make a mistake? Am I in error? The problem is today on Twitter, people won't accuse you of making a mistake. They'll accuse you of being a liar and a cheat. And it's like, no, I made a mistake. I mean, we do make mistakes. So I try to sift it and say, is there something to it? And then I try to be, it's hard not to be emotionally impacted by people who come after you. So I talked to Leslie about it. I talked to Mark Middleberg about it.
Okay.
I try not to rationalize it, but I try to be as objective as I can about it, like I was as a journalist. In my journalism days, if you made a mistake, you ran a correction the next day in the newspaper.
Wow.
So you had to fess up and say, yeah, I messed up and I'm setting the record straight. So I've had a couple of things like that I've had to go back in my books and correct mistakes that I made. But it is hard. It's an emotional thing, especially on social media. I find generally there's a kernel of truth in a lot of it, or some of it that's worth considering and weighing and owning. But a lot of it is hyperbolic, and a lot of it comes from people who are hurting for one reason or the other. And, I'll tell you a quick story. I got a letter once full of vitriol. Oh my gosh, just a hateful letter. It's like, wow. And I was really upset about it. So I was going to write back a hateful letter. I was going to say, oh yeah, I'll tell you what, buddy. And I thought, no, can't do that. So instead I reached out to this guy. And what I found out is that he was a PhD who had gone blind.
Oh my goodness.
Who had lost his job.
Wow.
Who was living on welfare in a trailer.
Oh.
And he was hurting. He was hurting. And when I connected with him, we connected on a human level. And and really had a good conversation and so forth. So I find that if I can reach out to someone who's been critical and have a conversation with them, often you get beyond the hyperbole and you get down to a personal relationship. And often there's something driving it that goes beyond just a mistake that maybe you made.
That is so helpful and good. And it takes humility to respond that way. That's my goal. Doesn't always happen, but that's the goal. So, hey, let me flip it this way. What about success, in the sense that I'm sure when you became a Christian and became a pastor, you weren't thinking you're going to write a best-selling book. I presume we're going to have a movie based on your life. Like, how have you dealt with that and tried to stay grounded in your faith and identity?
Yeah, I never expected to write. I wrote one book when I was an atheist. And after I left journalism and went into the church, I never expected to write a book. In fact, I left journalism in '87, and my first Christian book didn't come out, I don't think, till '95 or somewhere there.
Okay.
And so it wasn't part of my plan, but I've had some success with it. How do I deal with success? It's a little embarrassing sometimes. I feel the least interesting topic is me. I feel like that's the least interesting thing.
Okay.
So I don't particularly like talking about my life, because honestly, it's not that exciting. I think I just try to be. I try to take a cue from Luis Palau. Luis Palau was friends with every busboy, with every waitress, with every gas station attendant, with every Quickie Mart attendant. I mean, he was just everybody's friend.
Hmm.
And he seemed unaffected by
Hmm.
his notoriety and his worldwide fame. And I try to take a page from that and just treat people as people who matter to God. You know, as a mentor of mine said, you've never locked eyes with another human being who Jesus didn't die for.
That's great.
So every person you see is a person who matters to the Father, and I try to treat him that way.
Hmm.
And um, I try to be generous in terms of the finances that God has flowed our way, and to give to those who are in need. And um, it's I don't like this the quote unquote Christian celebrity thing,
Yeah, I hear
because
you.
I don't think of myself that way, but uh, B, there's people that think that there's some secret club with secret handshake or something, and we're different than we're just folks.
Hmm.
People. Here's the biggest misconception about me: people think I'm smart. That's that's you know, all I am. I'm just smart enough to interview smart people. That's all. I just find very smart people and I interview them. People think, wow, you must be really fun. No, I just read a lot of their stuff and I ask them the kind of questions that everybody's got.
Hmm.
And I'm trained as a journalist, so I write it like I would an article. And I don't have to be the genius. I just find the geniuses and talk to them.
Hey, there's a brilliance in that. You know, what would you say is the key to asking a good question? Because one of the disciplines I've tried to learn is to be a better question asker for so many reasons. Jesus
Yeah,
asked questions. It
yeah,
unlocks
yeah,
relationships and wisdom.
yeah.
What's the key to asking a good question?
I think part of it is making sure you don't ask a question that has a quick answer. So it's easy in an interview to ask a question that has a yes or no answer.
Okay.
Um, that's a bad question because that
Okay.
doesn't take you anywhere. You want to ask a question that digs deep, that trying to get to the emotional level, that gets beyond the. So I try to ask a question that I think the average reader would want to know. And that comes from my journalism days when I'm, writing for a million readers on a Sunday.
Sure.
When I try to ask, what's the question everybody's wondering about? Often that's not the obvious question
Okay.
or the popular question in terms of what people think you're going to ask. But so I try to often, if I'm going to interview somebody well known, I'll ask a lot of folks, what would you ask them?
Huh.
And I try to gather a lot of thoughts
Oh,
from
that's
different
smart.
kinds of people. But I think this also has changed me as an apologist um, because it used to be. Here, I'll give you an example. When I would get into a spiritual conversation with someone who isn't a Christian, often the way I would unlock that conversation, I would say to them, if you could ask God any one question and you knew He'd give you an answer right now, what would you ask Him? Well, if you ask that to an average American, 80% of the time, it'll be a question of some permutation of why does God allow pain and suffering?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Now, as an apologist and an evangelist, what I used to do is say, oh, that's a great question. Let me give you 5 reasons why God allows pain and suffering. I don't do that
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
Instead of doing that, I ask a follow up question. And follow up questions are the key. So, if you could ask God any one question, you would give an answer. What would you ask? Well, I'd ask, why does God allow pain and suffering? Well, then I say, wow, of all the possible questions in the universe, why did you choose that one?
That's great.
Now they say, oh, well, because my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer recently. I want to know, where's God in the middle of that? Or my business went bankrupt in the middle of the pandemic. Where was God in the middle of that?
Wow.
Or we lost a child in childbirth 5 years ago. Where was God in the middle of that? Now you're getting to the real issue. And you know what? They don't want a 5 point sermon on why God allows pain and suffering.
Hmm.
They want someone to be Jesus to them and put their arm around and say, I'm so sorry. Tell me about it. So I've learned to dig a little deeper, to be less ready to give a 5 cent answer to $1 million question,
Wow.
um, to do more listening than talking. And I, by the way, Gary Poole,
Yeah.
who who wrote a
Yeah.
book, ironically called The Complete Book of Questions. That's a great title for a book. He taught me how to do that. And so that's the approach I take now. So I think asking that follow-up question, why did you ask that question? Now it just takes it to a whole different level.
That's such a great, just wise approach. I love to hear that. Let me ask you another question. This one's a little tougher. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about the Ravi Zacharias misconduct. And as you know, I did an entire interview with my dad that just got a lot of positive feedback because he had been sexually abused, so understands what it's like not to be believed, but has also
Right.
lived a more well-known international apologetic ministry and had some insights. We won't probe all of that, but a lot of people have been talking about how evangelism and apologetics should change moving forward
Mm.
because of this. Do you have any thoughts on whether it should, and if so, how?
I'm not sure because of the Ravi situation, things need to change. I think things do
Okay.
need to change. I'm not sure it's because I think the lessons to me from the Ravi situation are accountability,
Mm,
transparency, um, um, and that's why I'm thankful I've got Mark in my life who knows everything about me. It's why I travel with my wife. That's why I'm glad we're together,
hmm.
and she can be with me. And so I think to me the more relevant question for the broader Christian world is how can all of us have a higher degree of accountability and avoid sinful situations that can ultimately be damaging to us and to others. I think apologetics in general is changing in several ways. I think we are doing more listening than talking than we used to. I think it's important that we respect people.
Hmm.
Richard Dawkins is not our enemy.
Hmm.
Atheists are not our enemies. Skeptics are not our enemies. Satan is our enemy. We have to see people as people who matter to God, who
Wow.
may have spiritual sticking points in their journey toward God. They may not be as far along as we are. They matter to God. We should respect them. We should validate them as people who matter to the Father. Um, Give them time. Don't demand a quick response. I mean, it took me 2 years of investigation to come to faith. It takes a
Hmm.
lot of people a lot of time to resolve these issues and so forth. So I think there are things we can learn in a sort of postmodern culture about being more sensitive. The example I gave about not giving an automatic sermon when somebody asks you a question, but digging beneath
It's
that to
great.
find what's motivating the question. I think that is an example of what we need to do more and more of. But I think for the Ravi thing, I think it's more of an issue of how do we stay pure? How do we have a structure around us that provides accountability and transparency and protection?
That's really smart. There's a lot of takeaways, but one thing I've been saying to students who think if I can sell a certain number of books and be on stage and have YouTube hits, then I'll be happy and have a meaningful life. I think Ravi, his experience completely flips that on its head. What are
Yeah,
we
yeah,
chasing after? That's
yeah.
certainly not it. So
Yeah,
that is a
absolutely. And I think that's another reason why we can never divorce evangelism from apologetics.
hmm,
Sometimes people get so into apologetics and so into the minutia of the evidence and so forth, they forget, why are we doing this? We're
hmm.
doing this because there are lost people headed for hell who need the gospel and who need to understand why it makes sense and why it's true. And sometimes if we fall too much into the apologetics realm without remembering why we're doing it, um, um, you know, we get sucked into a whole different world where we lose that sense of purpose. My purpose is not to go on a big stage and give a talk. It's not to write a
Amen.
best-selling book. My purpose is to reach people with the gospel. And if God wants to use books to do that or a talk that I give, whatever, that's great. But you know what? If not, that's fine too. If it's just me talking to my neighbor, that's okay. So when we link it strongly to evangelism, I think that gives us the mission that we should stay focused on.
That's awesome. I love that. One question I had when we were chatting before, I showed
Yeah,
you that I keep on my desk a, little sequoia pine cone because it's the smallest
yeah,
pine cone, and the seed for a pine cone is actually the size of an oat, and yet by volume,
Wow.
it's the biggest tree in the world. And every time I see it, it just reminds me that I feel like someone as inconsequential as me, maybe God could use me to make a difference. Kind of like James 3, something small has
Yeah.
big, can have big power. Is there any picture or thing you keep on your desk that just encourages you or reminds you of things that are important?
Yeah, a lot of family pictures. Here's a
Hmm.
little thing that somebody gave me. It's just a little wooden thing that says wisdom.
Okay.
And it reminds me to seek wisdom. There's a
Okay.
difference between knowledge and wisdom. There's a
That's right.
difference between information and wisdom. But I'll tell you the thing I like the most. Let me get it here. It's right behind me. Oops.
We got
My
you.
grand, yeah, my granddaughter, Brighton. You talk about the Christian success and celebrity thing and so forth. She's when she was about 8 or 9 years old or seven, she was little. She was coming back from some activity, and she got into the back seat of the car, and there were a couple of kids there who were talking about me, that they'd
Hmm.
read one of my children's books, and they said, "Oh yeah," and Brighton got upset. She said, "He's my Papa.
Wow.
He's my Papa. He's not your Papa. He's my Papa." And so she drew me this drawing. I
Oh,
don't know if
that
you
is
can see
so
it,
cute.
uh, but it's there. It is. It's we're holding hands there,
Oh
um,
gosh.
and so she said that to me to say, "That's her and that's Bop."
That's super precious. Oh,
So I
that's so
love that.
fun.
I love that.
That's really
So
fun.
I love my grandkids. We just the two oldest grandkids have come to faith and were just recently baptized. Um,
Wow.
my little, yeah, my 15-year-old, she's our oldest.
Okay.
She is so on fire with her faith. In fact, she's going on a mission trip to Alaska this summer.
Wow.
And she's been on two previous mission trips, but she told me, they actually left the youth group at the church she was at to go to another church. And I said, "Why did you go? Why did you leave that church to go to a different church?" And she said, "Because the kids in my youth group weren't paying attention." She said, she
That's
said,
great.
when the teacher was speaking, they were talking and they were on their phone. And I'm trying to take notes. I'm trying to learn. So she's part of this youth group at this church, and it's really on fire. She showed me her Bible. It's all marked up,
Oh,
and
that's great.
she's just growing in her faith. And our little Penelope, who's a couple years younger than her, was just baptized, and it's just exciting to see the faith of this next generation come alive.
Well, I was going to ask you this. There's a lot of just negative talk on all sides of the political aisle today. There's a lot of concern amongst Christians, and I think some is genuine in terms of questions like, say, religious liberty, etc. But
Yeah.
you're an upbeat, optimistic person, a lot like my dad. What gives you hope to stay positive moving forward? Is it the next generation, or what gives you hope moving forward?
I'm not always positive.
Hmm.
You see me as positive. Leslie sees me in the other moments. She will tell you I have great highs and great lows.
We all do.
Yeah, but generally, overall, I'm optimistic
Hmm.
because I see the gospel still works. And I see younger people like my granddaughter, not just coming to faith, but alive in her faith and wanting to tell people about Jesus and going on mission trips and so forth. And golly, that just fuels me. It just excites me to see that
Hmm.
there is hope. The gospel still works.
Amen.
And every time I hear of someone coming to faith, I just say, you know what? Yep, it's still working. It's still working after 2,000 years. There's another one. And that's why I love stories of people coming to faith. I wrote the book Case for Grace
Yeah.
just to tell stories of people whose lives were changed by Christ. And I guess that's why I'm optimistic. My attitude is, if God can take someone like me, who is a profane and an immoral and a drunken
Hmm.
narcissist and hedonist, and do 180 on me, then there's hope for everybody. There's hope for anybody. Um, uh, you know, somebody told me once, if God can take the worst thing that could ever happen in the history of the universe,
Hmm.
which is the death of the Son of God on the cross, and turn it into the best thing that has ever happened in the universe, which is the opening of heaven to all who follow him, that God could take the worst possible situations in this world and turn them into good. And I remember that Peter Kraft told me that, the
Wow.
philosopher.
Yeah.
And, I've always remembered that as I look at what seems often to be a hopeless world.
Hmm.
And there is, I'm a journalist, so I read the papers every day, and
Sure.
I see the things that are going on, and it's depressing at many times. But I go back to that quote and that reminder that, God is powerful enough to do a 180 on it.
That's a great example. I love that. Now, I was going to ask you for one of your favorite stories of how someone's used your books, but
Yeah.
I gotta ask you to share the Evel Knievel story because this is one of my
Yeah.
all-time favorite
Yeah.
examples. So
Oh my gosh.
tell us that story.
I'm sitting at my desk one day and the phone rings and I pick it up and I answer it and I say, hello. And the guy says, is this Lee Strobel? I said, yeah. He says, this is evil. And I thought Satan has got my phone number. Can Satan do that? Is that possible for Satan to get my phone number? I thought it was unlisted. Yeah, he said, no, Evel Knievel. Oh, okay. Well, I'm a huge motorcycle fanatic, going way back. I used to write for Cycle World magazine, and it used to be totally into motorcycles. So, of course, I was a big Evel Knievel fan when I was younger. And he told me the story of how he was on the beach in Florida, and God spoke to him, he said, on the inside. And God said to him, Robert, which was his real name, Robert, I've saved you more times than you'll ever know. Now I need you to come to me through my son, Jesus.
Wow.
And he felt this and he thought, I don't even know who Jesus is. So the only Christian he knew was Frank Gifford, the sportscaster, Kathy Lee Gifford's husband.
Yep.
He calls up Frank Gifford and he says, Frank, I had this experience. What do I do? Who is Jesus? And Frank said, get the Case for Christ,
Wow.
the book, and it'll explain it all. Anyway, Evel Knievel had one of the most radical born-again experiences of anybody I've ever encountered.
Hmm.
He was absolutely turned inside out by God. He called up Robert Schuller at the Crystal Cathedral because he was on television. And he said, I've come to faith in Jesus. I want to be baptized and let the world know and tell them about Jesus. Schuller thinking, wait a minute, I got to
Sure.
check this out. Schuller traveled all the way to Florida to check it out and found out, yeah, this guy's born again.
Wow.
So he comes to the Crystal Cathedral and he's up there in front of this large congregation and they say, tell us your story before he's baptized. And it's online.
It's on
You can
YouTube.
go.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he just, with a childlike, and of course he's got oxygen because he was dying of a lung condition. And he said it was such childlike innocence. He told his story, and then at the end he said, "Do you know Jesus? Have you met Jesus? And you can know him." And
Wow.
and after that, Schuller's son was supposed to preach that day. He ripped up his sermon. He said, "You've heard the gospel." He said, if anybody wants to come up right now, receive Christ and be baptized, come on up." Well, in 2 services, 720 people.
Oh my
came
goodness.
forward. Yeah. It was like Pentecost. Christianity Today did a little article about it. It was like Pentecost. They were running out of water. It was unbelievable. And so I got to know Evel pretty well. He'd call me up about once a week, and we'd talk. And his biggest lament, and I tell this to young people, his biggest lament, he said, Lee, I lived a life. I was a drunk. I was a womanizer. I went to prison. If I had only come to faith as a kid, as a teenager, my whole life could have been different. I could have served God. I could have told people about God. And I would tell him, I'd say, Evel, I understand that. You can't go back and redo it. But because God can redeem
Amen.
who you became, and he can take your life. You have credibility with certain people you wouldn't otherwise have. And when you get up and say, after the life I've lived, I have discovered Jesus is real. He will change your life. He will change your eternity. You have a credibility with certain people you wouldn't otherwise have, and God will use you. And he certainly did. Hundreds of people coming to faith.
Oh
But
gosh.
he was radically. There was a men's magazine. This is hilarious. A men's magazine went to interview him, and they're hoping for all these stories about his wild life and everything. He didn't want to talk about his past. He wanted to talk about Jesus. So this poor reporter got nothing out of this interview. So he writes this article, and he just uses a bunch of old stuff about Knievel. And at the end of the article, he says, "Yeah, and so I was with him in his house, and all he wanted to talk about was Jesus."
Wow.
It was great. So on his tombstone, he has etched, "Believe in Jesus."
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
believe in Jesus. So it's just a heartwarming story. He was a great guy. He was hilarious. And he would ask me all kinds of offbeat questions about archaeology and about the Bible, and he was just full of curiosity. Couldn't learn fast enough. So
One of the pastors where he went to church at the Crystal Cathedral was a friend of mine, and he said he would call him up, the last weeks or months of his life, time after time, just endless theological questions. He was just hungry. And his boss was like, "It's Evel Knievel. Your job is to answer and talk to him." And I thought, well, what do you do?
Awesome. That's right.
So it was pretty fascinating. Awesome. Hey, Lee, what encouragement would you have for younger evangelists or apologists?
I would say what Luis Palau said. He would communicate from heaven. Go for it. Go for it. Just, don't wait for God to put a call on your life. The default call on all of our lives is to share Jesus with others. So I would say seize every opportunity to share the gospel with people you encounter along the road of life. Get educated. If you're going to be, even if you're not going to be a quote unquote apologist, I don't consider myself an apologist. I consider myself an evangelist who does apologetics. But if you're going to be an apologist, you need to get educated. And so there's some great programs out there. Biola is one of them. You should pursue a degree so you know what you're talking about. But I think these days, every evangelist needs to be an apologist at some level, because the questions come fast and furious, and the internet fuels them. And we need to be ready, as 1 Peter 3:15 says, to give a defense, to give an answer to anyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have. Lee, but never lose that connection between evangelism and apologetics. That's, don't delve so deeply into apologetics that you forget the fact that that woman at the public library who you've checked out a book from matters to God, and she needs to hear the gospel.
Lee, you've been such a supporter of what we're doing at Biola. I know you encouraged Kyle to go to the MA philosophy program, and we were students together, and now we teach together. Just interviewed him recently for our podcast. His new book on prayer is fantastic. He's just a friend doing great work. So we really appreciate your encouragement here at Biola. But I heard about your program at Colorado Christian. It's young.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the Christian world, there can be competition. The moment I heard about this, I was like, praise the Lord. We need as many programs, and we need to lock arms right now.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Colorado Christian in terms of apologetics and evangelism.
Yeah, we have a program called the Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics. And we use that term, applied apologetics, to say we're not trying to create necessarily PhDs in philosophy. That's not our goal. It's important, and we believe in that. But we're looking for people who are going to be influencers in the culture, people who do podcasts, books, radio shows, do what you're doing, Sean. We want people who will share across the back fence to a neighbor and so forth. So we've launched 91 courses.
91?
Wow. I've gone around the country, and I chose about 40 to 50 PhDs in evangelism and apologetics, and we got them to create these 91 courses. We have undergraduate degrees in 4 areas of concentration. We have master's degrees in 4 areas of concentration. But to me, the most exciting thing is we're just now launching. In fact, I have right here the list of our courses that we're launching on the certificate level.
Oh, and good.
Yeah, what I mean by that is a lot of people don't want another degree. They've already got a degree, but they would love to take a course and learn. Like we have courses on historical evidence for Christianity, science in the Bible, a case for Easter, how to share your faith naturally, building an evangelistic church, etc. All kinds of courses that you can take, not for credit, but all online, so you can grow and learn as a
That's
Christian
great.
and just be more effective in sharing and defending your faith. So we're just about to launch those. I've got a list here. There's about 30 courses that we've already are set to launch. Everything from, C.S. Lewis,
Great.
a course on C.S. Lewis, to world religions, to Islam and Christianity and so forth. Lots of stuff. So we're hoping that, there are people out there who say, I haven't got time and I don't have the inclination to earn another degree, but boy, I'd like to take a couple courses. So all of our courses, whether they're undergraduate, graduate, or certificate, are all online. And so people can do it from their homes. There's a experience sort of like we're doing with Zoom or with a similar platform where you participate with other students and a professor.
It's great.
So we're excited about it. We have hundreds of students who are already going through it. And unfortunately, we launched it right as COVID hit.
Oh,
and so
gosh.
getting the word out has been difficult.
I'm sure.
We're trying to get the word out a little more. If people want information, they can go to Strobel Center, one word, strobelcenter.com.
strobelcenter.com to get information.
Right.
That is that's
right
great to know. I know Clay Jones, who has been teaching at Biola for a long time, is doing one of the programs there. I'm thrilled he's doing the class on the problem of evil and using his books, which I'm biased, but I think they're two of the best. So
yeah, I do too. In fact, I interviewed for my book on heaven.
Oh, good.
Immortal. Yeah,
good.
It was really.
He's a great guy.
By the way, we have scholarships available as well.
Oh, good. So Strobel Center, people can find out more about it. That's fantastic. Yep. I got one more question for you here. This is a great one. I did not expect this one. It says, what would you recommend for older aspiring apologists?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had lunch the other day with a guy who was in our master's program that we're doing at Colorado Christian, who is 69 years old. And he got his MBA about 20 years ago. And I said, wait a minute, you're 69 years old and you're studying apologetics and you're getting your master's degree? What are you going to do with it? And I love what he answered. He said, Lee, my vision is to create a network of small group experiences for non-believers all throughout the city of Houston.
Wow.
And that's one of the courses that we teach, is how to do small group evangelism and apologetics, which I think is the wave of the future. And I thought, this is fantastic. This guy's my age, and he's launching a whole new ministry he's going to do in his retirement years. So I say, you're never too old for this. Who knows how God might use you as God opens up maybe more time in your life during your later years to be able to do ministry. So there's one example of someone who's going to do what Luis Palau said and go for it.
I love it. That's such a good word of encouragement. So I'm going to tell our viewers, make sure they pick up your book, The Case for Heaven. You said it can be pre-ordered now, but it comes out, you said September? When it release?
September 14th.
September 14th. All right, I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm going to bug you for an interview close to then.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of options are going to come up. We will lock it in. So I'll follow up with a message. But I definitely, viewers, the case books. There were a whole bunch of comments here, Lee, of people saying Case for the Real Jesus, Case for Christ. My personal favorite of your books, you didn't ask, it's The Case for Grace.
Oh, no kidding.
I love The Case for Grace. My wife used it in a Bible study with a group of her other friends who are moms. Yeah, about 2 or 3 years ago.
Awesome. Real quick funny story about that book. I had all these stories about remarkable stories. One guy in there killed 27,000 people.
Oh my goodness.
These are amazing. And then I thought, wait a minute. People are going to read this book and say, oh, those people needed God. I don't need God. I didn't do it. So I said, I have to interview a nice guy. And somebody who realized I'm a nice guy, but I needed God. So I went to Biola and I interviewed Craig Hazen from Biola, who is a nice guy. And he told me about realizing, yeah, I may be a quote unquote nice guy, but I'm a sinner who needs grace.
Wow.
And I told this story in the book, but I thought, thank goodness there's a nice guy story in that book, because people read some of these other stories and say, boy, some of these other people, they really needed God.
Well, it's a great book. If people watching are not aware of that one, pick up Case for Grace, but help propel it in the apologetics evangelism world. So pre-order The Case for Heaven now. And if you want to hear more about the apologetics program at Colorado Christian, check out strobelcenter.com. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, because once a month or so I'm doing these kind of behind the scenes interview. But next week we actually have Nancy Piercy coming up, who's agreed to come on.
She's awesome.
Wayne Grudem is going to come on, Craig Keener, some really interesting, fascinating scholars are going to come on and just give a sense of their life and their experience, and a lot of the questions I asked you today, Lee. But 2 topics you won't want to miss. Friday, interviewing Caleb Kaltenbach has done massive research on the Equality Act. More research than anybody I know, and exactly what Christians need to know. So at 12 o'clock on Friday, mark your calendars and join us then. Next Wednesday, Scott Ray, who's one of the leading Christian ethicists in the world, is going to come on, and we're going to talk about vaccinations, right or wrong, what's the ethics behind them. So if those topics interest you, make sure you hit subscribe and hit notifications so you can join us. And of course, this channel is brought to you by Biola Apologetics. So after you check out Colorado Christian, come over here and check out Biola. We'd love to partner with you. So Lee, don't disappear. I want to say goodbye and we're done. But to everybody, thanks so much for joining us. I love seeing familiar faces on here. Great questions and interactions. Blessing everybody. We'll see you Friday at noon to talk about the Equality Act.
Thanks for having me.